Awesome. We should be good now. So, hey everyone, welcome to the Twitch stream. If you're coming from the Gameathon, then by now you probably have gone through multiple workshops about Unity, GameMaker, how to make 2D games, 3D games, everything. And today we have a really special guest, Benjamin Rivers, who is a game developer himself, and he's going to teach us about game design. So yeah, Ben, I'm going to let you take over from now.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, everyone, let's get through this. We got a lot of stuff to cover. I hope you have notebooks because I'm going to do a lot of stuff. So a couple quick things. I have this really long title for this talk, which is stupid, called You Have Everything You Need to Get Your Game Done. Now here's how to do it. We'll be talking about game design and production specifically. What I wanted to do was make sure that you knew what you needed to do to take all those ideas that you've probably learned and do something with them and actually get stuff done. Because that's, in my experience, the hardest part. So 3 things you need to know about me. Yes, I'm a game developer here in Toronto, and I love games. Clearly, I'm also old, so I really like old games. Sorry about that. I may not look like it, but I'm a big fan of heavy metal. At least I wore black today, just to sort of tie it in. And I love comics and manga, and everything I sort of do related to games and all that kind of stuff is related to one of these 3 things: old games, heavy metal, or comics or manga. This is a manga series from the 80s, by the way, called Touch. It's amazing. So my wife and I actually made games together, and we've made 3 games so far. The first one is called Home, the second one is called Alone with You, and the third one is called Worse Than Death. Since we've been married for a long time, we like to joke that it spells out the phrase being home alone with you is worse than death, especially in quarantine. And we've released these games over the past 8 years or so, and we actually just released Home on Nintendo Switch yesterday, like a special edition of it. So we kind of just... all the stuff I'm going to tell you is stuff that we're working on actively that we do all the time, even today. So as you can kind of see, we do a lot of retro kind of stuff, like Home and Worse Than Death are both horror games. Alone with You is, I call it, a sci-fi romance adventure. It's a genre of one game, I think. And they're all sort of like weird and esoteric, very story-driven. And they have the benefit of being small enough that a very small team like ours can handle it. And a lot of the tips that I'm going to give you today are assuming that you might be working in a small team or by yourself to make something. All right, let's do this. You guys ready? Here we go. There's a lot of stuff to cover. It's like a lot of slides in this. Don't worry, these are fun slides, not boring ones. So we're going to do 3 things today. We're going to talk about getting your concept ready to actually make something. We're going to talk about getting your game done, a bunch of actually very helpful tips and very practical kind of stuff, and 6 rules at the end that are going to help make this a whole lot better. And of course, if you have any questions during this or whatnot, like you want to moderate that for me and let me know if anyone's stuck on something, just let me know. Happy to deal with that. And what I can also do, I think we might be doing Q&A at the end, but please don't let it just be me talking, because that's what I do all day, every day. All right, let's roll into this. Getting your concept ready. So obviously the hugest part about making a game is you have to think about what it is you want to make. Now, I talk about this even though you've already gone through a bunch of talks and whatnot before, because sometimes people have an idea what they want to do, but they don't actually know what that is specifically. You can sort of think blue sky and go, I want to make a game like this, I want to make a game like this, and not really know what that means. Here I show you a bunch of examples of some very basic stuff. Things like, from the top left, like a visual novel, a puzzle game, a top-down retro-style adventure game, Mario. Hollow Knight, which is like a sort of roguelite Metroidvania style game, and Edith Finch at the bottom right, which is like a very beautiful 3D, much more rich and lush, expensive looking adventure game. All this stuff is totally valid, and what I'm going to tell you today applies to pretty much all of this stuff. But of course, some things may vary depending on what it is you're trying to do. But it is important to understand what it is you're trying to make. So I'm going to use this really silly example as we're going through this. Please don't steal my idea. I drew this, I think, like 7 years ago, and I just keep using it because it's a good example. Don't make this game, please. Copyright me. But this is like this goofy example of a game I drew before, where it was meant to be like a side-scrolling, screen-by-screen action platformer where you were the scavenger. Oh, wait. Wrong slide. I was going to show you this picture. A scavenger with a beard and a cool toque, essentially climbing this like destroyed building and collecting stuff that you need. Very simple kind of stuff. And the whole point is you're trying to get some parts that you needed and then get back to a starting point, and then you sort of move from level to level. I don't even remember why I did this. I think I was just spitballing ideas. But as you can see, I always do stuff in sketches. Remember, comics are a huge part. I make comics as well. So everything for me is all about like sketching things and drawings. You can see how amazing these drawings are. Just incredible. But let's say this is my game idea, and let's say you have worked with yourselves or your team or your friends or whatnot, and you are working on something. Now, the first idea, and unfortunately the most boring part, is you have to turn your idea into a design document. You may have heard the term GDD, or game design document. This is when you get to like the professional stuff where it all starts sounding really boring, but it is sort of an important step. And what it is a way for us as game developers to make sure our ideas are put down in a coherent way so that like a week from now, 3 months from now, whatever, we still know what it is we're making, like this question. We still remember what this is, and we know where we're going and what we need to do. Because if you kind of go into a project without it, even without something like this, you're going to get lost really, really quickly. This is a stage that I teach my students, and it's a stage that, to be honest, all of us have trouble with, because the larger in scope your game gets, the more work you have to do here, and it's never fun work. I'm working on a design document now for a new game. It's so long. Like, we thought we were making a really small game. It just gets bigger and bigger, and it's kind of annoying. But this is the first thing. So here's just like a really simple example that I just randomly pulled off the internet. I don't even know what this is for. But, you know, you can make a bunch of boring text files that simply have like a summary of what your game is, a description, target audiences, settings, storyboard, like all this kind of stuff is often included in a design document. But it also can include things like this. This is the actual design document from our second game, Alone With You. It's like the first page of it. And you can see gray boxes, like who doesn't love that? But it's essentially like the game loop of what's going on. You wake up in the morning, receive this mission from a computer, you go to a new level and you're navigating and stuff is happening. You return back to your home base, and then there's these dates at the end. That's where the romance stuff happens. And then certain things happen at certain days here on the left that further the plot or have very specific important mechanic requirements. And essentially the whole game is a loop like this. The thing I always tell my students is becoming a quote unquote real game developer is all about taking all the fun out of making games, squeezing all of that fun out, and breaking it down to the most boring gray parts where you're like, okay, so what is it that we're doing? And unfortunately, that's just the way you kind of have to get things done. It doesn't have to be boring, but you know, it sounds like it when someone like me explains it. It can also include things like this, like just notes about what it is you're going to need to do, like progression, time considerations, items, all this kind of stuff. Every game design document is very, very different. You can actually look up some really fun ones online. You can look up things like what's called the Doom Bible, which is the old FPS Doom, one of my favorite games. You can look up the original design document that was created for that game that was never used, actually. You can look up things for really old games like Prince of Persia and see some of that stuff. And that's good because they're older, they're simpler, and they have a lot of really cool tips into that. But you can also go and find lots of stuff. There's a website called gamasutra.com, which is like a business industry website, and they have links to examples of game design documents as well. And then you start having to ask all these questions like, okay, we have our beautiful idea for a cool game that we want to make. What do we have to do to make this? And here's where we start taking our design document and we start turning it into stuff we have to do. It's like taking all the fun stuff, turning it into work. But this is obviously really important. And the reason why I stress all this stuff is you can sort of get ahead of yourself and just start making things without really getting organized. And trust me, there's like a golden rule in life where you can only ever go so far. And then you realize, I don't know what I'm doing. I have to stop and get organized. So if you do it first, you kind of avoid all those issues. So let's go back to this example again of my beautiful, wonderfully illustrated sketch here. And let's look at some stuff that I figured out. So as I said, it's a 2D side-scrolling action-adventure platforming game. Here's what I think I need. I have this little player. Remember, he's got the sweet beard, little side satchel there. There are going to be two kinds of enemies in this example. There's like rats and scavengers. And I've sketched out some actions that need to be dealt with. Like, you know, you can swing your stick to hit things. The rat can get, like you can kill the rat, you can kill the scavenger, you can jump. And you can see I got these little screenshots that I sketched to sort of figure out what these screens would look like. Now here's where we start looking at what it is we need to do with that design document and with that idea. So I said, oh, I'm making a 2D platformer where you attack enemies and you jump. And it's like, okay, well, what does that mean? Well, what are the actions that you need to be able to do in the game, and how does that look? So here I always do this, again, sketch things out. So I need to have like an attack animation. We have, there's a move where you attack something. You have to be able to get hit, right? Because you can get hit by enemies. You can also die. So what does that look like? You can jump and grab on a ledge. And in this example, I've said, well, okay, if you can grab on a ledge, I need you to be able to like climb up, again, kind of like the old game Prince of Persia, or drop down. These are some things I need to do, but these are like very, very specific things. The thing you'll notice very quickly as you work on games is that for each cool idea you have, the number of these like tasks that get broken out that you have to start consider, they just sort of grow exponentially. So if you start to feel like things are getting overwhelming, it's time to start looking at some of these basic ideas and think about maybe simplifying them. So once again, we go to everyone's favorite thing, a bunch of words. So here's the part that I always do. I say, okay, I have things that have to get done to make this game a reality. And they kind of get separated into these two tasks. Now, again, I'm talking about like a pretty simple 2D game here. If you're working on something 3D or more experimental, this stuff might be different, but you get the idea. In this case, I've got actions and assets. So actions are things that I need to be able to know how to do. So for me, this is like, oh, how do I program this stuff? Like someone, whether that's me or there's a programmer on the team or whoever, needs to actually make this stuff happen. So I need to, for example, for the player, learn to program how to jump the player like up and over. He's got to be able to grab a ledge. He's got to be able to climb up a ledge, like I mentioned. He can fall. He needs to be able to attack to the left and right, attack while jumping. And he needs to be able to pick up items because that's like a thing we have to do. We have to pick up health items and then something at the end. The enemies also need to have actions that I need to learn how to program. Move left to right. They need to like go to the end of a ledge and turn around so they don't fall off, all that kind of stuff. And then we start looking at assets like, oh goodness, I need to make like the blocks and the walls and the ledges and the pickup items. And I need to write or create all these sprites or the graphics. So the player, if he's standing, the animation of the player walking, the player jumping up, the player jumping over, et cetera, et cetera. You can see how these lists get very, very simple. Or sorry, these lists for these simple ideas get very, very large. Here you have, over on the right, I've got like sound effects and music that I'm going to need. And it's like, man, this very simple idea has suddenly ballooned into like a whole lot of work. And that is like the unfortunate thing about game development. Suddenly you're like, yes, it's going to be so sweet. Oh my goodness, what are we going to do to get this done? But the sooner you sort of figure this out, the sooner you can understand what it is you're doing and things become a whole lot less stressful. So why would you ever do this? You have to get organized. So this is what this lets you do. It lets you set clear goals about like when you do things, how much you can get done, all that kind of stuff. And like I said, it provides workable tasks. So suddenly these things are like stuff you can work on, whether it's assigning an artist animation, whether it's assigning a musician music or sound effects or whatnot. It gives you stuff to work towards, as opposed to this just like blue sky like idea about something. And it lets you track progress. So if you're organized or you have some kind of like team tracking thing, you can do that. I didn't put it in the slide deck, but like sometimes I get these like Google Docs of just stuff that we do, and they just get, oh, why do we do them? They're so daunting. It's just like row and row, column after column, but they kind of have to be there so that we know, oh, things are done, things are ready, things aren't ready. But if you really like spreadsheets, this is where all this stuff comes into play. There's a joke that if you look at AAA games especially, if you have the title of a game designer or like a game design lead at a AAA company, you're making like a big game like Watch Dogs or something, you're pretty much making spreadsheets and lists and emails because you're telling everyone else about this kind of stuff, but you're the one who has to make the list. So it sounds way more fun than it often is day to day. And it is true because you kind of have to take ownership over this stuff. So as an example, I mentioned the actions I got to be able to deal with, like I have to be able to hit, I have to be able to, be able to get hit, I have to be able to die, I have to be able to attack. And here I'm just showing with these highlights, okay, here are the sprites I have to now like figure out, understand what that means, get concepts for them, design them, assign them to an artist, all that kind of stuff. So at the beginning, your tasks start to look like the things you have to do to get your game done start to look really, really daunting, but you have to break them down. Because then they start turning into like, oh, things you can get done in a week or a day or whatnot. And then it becomes a whole lot less scary. Do you like my Toronto mug, by the way? I'm always on brand when I do these. So let's talk about getting organized here. Every team is different, and depending on whether you're using, GameMaker or Unity or whatnot, you might be doing a bunch of different things here, but just some real basic things that you can carry over from project to project. I say here, think like a production person. That means think about something you're going to have to do over and over and over again, and not just now, but like 6 months from now when you've probably forgotten a whole lot of stuff. And assume that you won't be working on something alone, even if you are, because it gets you in the right habit of being organized. Because let me tell you, when you have to get something done to like submit to Nintendo and you are extremely tired because you've been working all week and you go, I have no idea where my files are or what I'm supposed to be doing, being organized is the only way you're going to get through that. Because 6 months from now, you is going to be dealing with a whole lot of different stuff than now you. And you need to keep in mind that being able to look back at things and understand where you were and what you need and have everything named correctly is just going to save your life. So I show some real basic examples here. This, like, don't take this stuff literally. Do whatever it is you need to do, but just think about this and talk to your team. Like, if you are working with more than one person, talk to each other about what you need. A very basic example is like having folders that are organized, like agreeing on how you're going to organize stuff and making sure everything has a place. Now, if you're using working remotely, which most of us kind of are these days, you might be using something like Git or some other sort of version control stuff, which does some of the stuff for you, but you still have to talk to your team and figure out what it is. Before I was a game developer, I worked in graphic design and web design for like 15 years. And all of my like good habits I learned from there, like working for clients and, working with office mates for clients and dealing with bosses and stuff like that. So being really organized just became part of my DNA. And it saved my life a lot when trying to get as much stuff as we get done in a day. Again, it doesn't have to be overly complicated, but it does have to be there. So as an example, here is for Worse Than Death, the most recent game that we, most recent new game, which we actually launched 1 year ago yesterday. We have simple folders for basic things. I have one called Game Assets, and I have folders called Design and Production. Design is where I basically keep all my working files, like layered files and things that are going to change. And Production is where I keep all the final assets that get imported, in my case, into GameMaker. Our stuff is simpler compared to a lot of other studios because we mostly work in 2D and whatnot. But I mean, like, as an example, Worse Than Death shipped on PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, iOS, PC, and Mac. So there's like a lot of stuff to keep track of. So being organized is really, really important. So as an example, this is probably going to confuse you more than make things clear, but we'll just roll with it. As an example, for Worse Than Death, we have like these cutscene images. These are all just like assets that are cut out and placed in certain parts of the game. And I try to keep naming conventions for all my files. This is something that if you work with a team, you should figure out early and stick to it. So in this case, I do like SPR, which stands for sprite, like a 2D graphic. Cut, meaning it's a cutscene. Which cutscene, in this case, is like ending cutscene 01. Spoilers, by the way. And then I have like these numbers for like, it's basically like cutscene page 1, panel 1, that kind of thing. This stuff, like, you will be so organized at the beginning, and then at some point, things will kind of get a little sideways in the middle. So this won't always be perfect, but do the best you can because it'll make your life a whole lot easier. If you're looking up tutorials and stuff online, especially for like GameMaker, Unity, whatever, people have different ways that they name things that are comfortable to them. There are no right, there's no right way to do it. It's just whatever makes sense for you and any team members you're working with, but do try to be consistent. Name sprites, name sounds, whatever it is. Because again, in 6 months, pretend you got amnesia and you have to somehow rebuild your project and like submit it to Xbox. So how are you going to know what goes where? Having conventions like this makes things a whole lot easier. So when does stuff need to be done? This is the worst part of making games, is deadlines and timing. But I'm going to try to help you get through a couple really practical situations here with this. So when you're planning out your game, whether this is like a jam game you're making with someone, whether this is a project you're doing for a class, or whether this is something you're doing as like a project you want to submit to like itch or Steam or whatever, it is beneficial to basically treat everything like it's a real project and answer all these questions. So you have to be honest about when something is due. With experience, you will learn there is a feeling in your gut when you're telling someone you can get something done by a time, and your gut will tell you, I'm totally lying to them right now. You will just know. And you should always trust your gut, and you should not give that answer because it will always come back to bite you in the butt. You should also never assume anything. If, for instance, you're working with a team member and they're asking you when you can get something done, and you realize there's a bunch of things you don't know about, like what it is what kind of art it is you're trying to produce, or resolution, or whatever color scheme. If you don't know, don't answer. Get that information first, and don't ever assume that something will sort of work out, because this is all going to add and make things more difficult later on. Some of the stuff sounds really basic, but like honestly, again, I'm so old, I still do some of the stuff to this day. And talk to the whole team. Like, don't ever just assume things and just kind of speak between like one or two team members. Make sure everyone's on the same page, because oftentimes team members will become bottlenecks during a process, and that's never fun, and that adds a lot of stress, which you absolutely do not need. And sometimes that might be on the programmer side, or the artist side, or musician, or designer, or whatever. But talk to everyone, make sure you're all cool. You don't have to use really fancy tools to do this stuff too. Honestly, like writing stuff down is really simple. You don't have to sign up for like an expensive software package. And my final tip here in the little yellow circle is, whatever you think you need, add like at least 20%, because you will always be wrong. The question is, by how much will you be wrong? So if you have at least 20% buffer, then you'll probably be okay. Sometimes I'm just ashamed of how long it takes for us to get stuff done, even though we totally know what we're doing. As an example, we launched the Nintendo Switch version of Home yesterday. My original schedule said a month ago. I kind of knew it was going to take an extra month, but I trusted my gut on that one. So, okay, obviously I can't see you guys, so I can't get like a show of hands or anything, but have any of you heard of a work back schedule? Look at this boring slide. Like, this is terrible, but if you have never heard of the term work back schedule, write it down. This is super useful. It is, as you might have imagined, a schedule that works back from a date. Whenever you need to get something done, the easiest way to figure this out is, when do you need to get it done by? I'm just putting in some random dates here, and then work back to figure out, well, okay, let's say I'm submitting to Nintendo for Q&A, like that. They got to test the game and approve it on their end so it can go up on the eShop. When do I need to submit that? Well, okay, I know that the thing has to go live on April 20th. And that means I know that it takes about a certain amount of time for Nintendo to approve, or if I screw up and have to resubmit something, that's going to eat up some time. So at the very worst case scenario, things have got to be submitted by March 15th. So essentially what you're doing is you're asking yourself a question. So you don't have to sit there and go, when does this due? Or like, when do I have to do stuff? You're like, I don't know. You can answer all these questions by saying, okay, when does the game have to come out? Well, we have a deadline on our project, or there's a jam that we want to submit it to, or we want to submit it to IGF or whatever. So that's your final date. Or we just make up a date because why not? And then you say, okay, well, when does that mean it has to get done so we can test for bugs at the very end? Okay, this date. Okay, well, when does the programmer need to have everything so that they can do the final bits? Oh, okay, this date. Okay, so when does that mean we have to get art assets done? Oh, okay, this date. And it's this constant string of backwards questions. And at some point, you will arrive at a start date, which will probably be like, oh man, that's like tomorrow, like always. And then you at least know, okay, well, in our scenario, we kind of know that we need to get this started next week in order to get X done. For us, every project plan is like this. Okay, we're going to do this by this date to show these people, cool. Okay, so we should probably just do it by this date. We need to get this done by this date, blah, blah, blah. Okay, cool. Holy crap, that's not enough time. Like, what are we going to do? And then every project's the same for every single studio. And then you just kind of figure it out. But this way, you don't have to sit there and go like, well, how long does it take to make something? And the answer is, I don't know. But if you ask an artist, well, we have a bunch of these tasks. I need you to make 5 animations. How long is it going to take you to do that? And they say, I need 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever. You go, okay, well, I guess we need 3 weeks to do that. How does that affect the schedule? So if you're ever in a moment when you're working on a project and you go, I don't know the answer to this, just ask some questions. You will find out. It's okay not to know. None of us have any idea what we're doing on most days. We just ask questions, get answers, and then go, okay, let's do this. And to be honest, I mostly just use a notebook for stuff. Home was all done on paper. I didn't actually put in my sort of design docs on here, but I do a lot of my planning and stuff with pencil on paper, kind of like the example I showed you here, because it keeps things easy. There are so many ways to keep organized. Whatever works for you makes sense. Talk to your team. Don't worry about it. Like, it's not about technology. It's just about getting organized. So, who do you need to make your game? Well, the easiest answer to this is like, it's not always you, and don't feel bad if it's not you. I have a tendency to just want to do everything myself, which is ludicrous. Like, don't ever do that. But if you do have a team, even if it's just like two of you, and you're trying to figure out what's going on, this is a stage where you go, okay, what can you do? What can I do? How do we figure out what this is? And then you simply go back to that task list and say, okay, it's like picking chores. Who's going to do what chores? And then you figure it out. And then people take ownership of that stuff and say, I will do this, I will do this, I will do this, and you're good. It sounds simple, but it really is. There's no like magic way to figure this out. It's just whoever is available. The one thing about making games, especially if you're really small, like we're an indie, obviously, so we're very small, is you are going to be doing a whole lot of stuff. We wear a lot of hats. Like, I do marketing, and I'm doing biz dev, and I'm flying to conferences, and I'm designing. Like, and Nancy's, doing all this other stuff. Like, we're putting out fires. It's just, you have to do a lot of stuff. So don't get too hung up on that. But just, you need to ask this question all the time, and you need to answer it. And if it's not you, that's great. Okay, let's talk about getting this done. This is some real good practical stuff. And I'm going to just jump right into those 6 rules, because this will kind of just explain things pretty quickly. We're actually racing through this talk pretty quickly, too. Rule number 1, review often. Do not work on a project for very long without talking to the people you're working with and being like, hey, are we cool? It's like, is everything going okay? Do you have problems? Do I have problems? Like, how are things going? Communication is really, really important. It sounds simple, but a lot of teams really forget to do this. I know, because I will see my students and I'll watch them in class, and they're trying to explain their projects to me, and it's obvious they haven't spoken to each other since before the moment they came to class. And I'm like, what are you guys doing? Like, you should have talked to each other. You're supposed to know this stuff before you come in. So make sure that you do have this as a constant for any project. And if you're just working on a project by yourself, that's totally fine. Do this with yourself. Check what you're doing. Check that task list and say, okay, where are we at? Like, how are things going? Don't just blindly like work on something and say, okay, well, I've got a bunch of tasks done. I'm not really sure if these are useful because I haven't checked in to see, what the program is up to or what the sound person's up to. Make sure they have that communication going. Don't just put your head down and forget about things. Ask yourself questions like this. Is this working? So there's a golden rule, which is if you are struggling with a task, like say you're trying to work on art and it's not going well, you have this design and it says like, okay, the sprites for the character have to do this. And you're working on them and you're working on them and you're like, this isn't going well. That is a sign that something is wrong. That's okay. That doesn't mean that you're bad at your job or someone else is bad at their job. It just means that there's something not quite working. So you need to ask that question and talk to your teammates and say, hey, something's not working out with this. As an example, we're working on a new project right now with my wife, my wife Nancy and I was doing a bunch of design stuff. And I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing. This is so hard. Like, what's going on? I was getting super frustrated. And I kind of just had like a total freak out. And I was looking at her like, I'm having a hard time getting these design sketches and sort of figuring out your ideas and the concepts that we have and putting them into a concrete form. And she was like, what are you doing? Like, I told you, we're basically making like this game that we talked about. It's like that. Like, we're making that. And I was overthinking everything. And so what we realized in that situation was I shouldn't be doing this design task at all. Like, she should, because she knows exactly where this is supposed to go. And I was basically just getting in our way. So we switched roles, and then she did the task, got it done like in one day. And I was like, oh, that's great. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And she's like, yeah, like that's what I told you to do. So I realized, okay, my job here is different than what I thought it was. And that's okay. But if we didn't have that conversation and we didn't sort of do the check-in, things could have gone horribly wrong. You can also talk about things like, is there a chance to do more? Like sometimes you realize, oh man, you know what? it's actually a lot easier to do this, like to get this programming thing done, or to animate this character, or to add this effect or whatnot. It's a lot easier than I thought. So maybe we can do some extra stuff here. You don't necessarily have to, but it's good to ask that question. You can also ask, is there something else I should be doing right now? I have a terrible habit. Like, if you're telling me I need you to do this, I'm basically like, what's that over there? And that's always the thing I want to do. I've had that since I was in grade school and high school. Absolutely terrible. I'd rather be playing Mortal Kombat than studying, even to this day. So if something is telling you that you probably should be working on something else because, hey, the programmer needs it more quickly because you got that schedule, or the artist needs to know something because they're trying to get something done and they need an answer, listen to those cues. Don't just work on something and say, oh, I'll get to this later. I'll get to this later. I'm working on this thing. Those are all like important things that are telling you you might need to switch what you're doing. And a very important question that a lot of people don't ask themselves, do I even need to be doing anything right now? Because sometimes the answer is no. If the answer is no, chill out. Just take a break, because there will be moments when you absolutely cannot. And that's like, having that downtime is good. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So rule number 2, focus. That's really bright on the screen. Also called multitasking is a myth. There's no such thing as multitasking. No matter how hard you try, no matter what you do, this will never work. All those books from the 80s were wrong. Here's a tip I have for you. Turn everything off while you're working. You need to focus on all of these tasks that you said you need to do. So you've got this. You've got a list. You need to go down that list. And the only way you can do that is to focus. Good old-fashioned focusing. Believe me, all of us are bad at this, even myself. I struggle with this despite knowing all this stuff. And a really important way to help deal with this is to turn everything off. Phone, notifications. Like, pro tip, you should never have a notification. You have a notification for like your mom and your significant other. That's it. Everything else can wait. Here's an actual known fact from like psychology and stuff like that. Every time you switch tasks, it takes you 20 minutes to ramp up to get back on track to where you were. So like, if you're like just in the flow and you're like, yeah, I'm killing at this task, like things are going great, and then you get distracted by checking your phone or doing something else, immediately you're like, oh no, productivity goes down, and it takes you 20 minutes to get back up where you kind of get that state again. It's 100% true. So think about it that way. Every time you're like, I really want to go check Twitter, just think that's 20 minutes I'm losing. And you go, can I afford to lose 20 minutes right now? If the answer is no, because I got to get that thing done for the programmer and I want to have a lunch and I don't want to sit at this computer anymore, then the answer is we'll do that later. But do keep this in mind, because this is 100% true. And it's a thing that will help you get through this stuff much more easily, because you will be bouncing back and forth. But if you can not, the less you can do this, the better. Rule number 3, this is called be your own boss, be your own employee, especially if you're working by yourself on a game or with like very small team. This is also called the strawberry field rule. So like, old man alert, I have to tell you a story that my elderly mother told me. This is so funny, like just grandma's story, okay? So my mom told me this story, but when she was a kid, she would go picking strawberries with her family. That was not like a fun thing to do like people think it is today. That was like basically child labor. Like, your parents take you out and they're like, go pick strawberries for a day. And the kids are like, why? But they did it. And you essentially have to have 2 roles when you're working in a small team or when you're working on yourself. You have to be both the boss and you have to be the employee. The secret is you can't do both at the same time. It's impossible. So the boss is the person who makes that list to say, here's what we have to work on today. I got to get these 3 sprites done, or I got to email the musician and tell them about the stuff that we need to do. Or I need to program some stuff in GameMaker to say, like, I need to learn how to program the jumping, and I'm going to try to do like the door transitions, whatever. So you have your list of stuff. And then you go into employee mode, which is you turn everything off and you just get it done. You say, oh, my mean boss just told me to do a bunch of stuff today. I have to get it done, or he or she is going to kick my butt. So let's just do it. And then you don't worry about that list anymore. You just look at the things that you have to do right now. So my mom always said when she was doing this strawberry picking, she basically would never look up at the field because it was terrifying. She'd be like, oh my God, there's like a billion strawberries. This is going to take forever. So what like her sibling would tell her is like, just fill the basket you have. That's your job. It'll go by real fast. Don't worry about it. So that's what I call the strawberry field rule. You can't do both these things at once. So get your stuff sorted at the beginning of the day, go into this mode and employee mode and just get it done. And you will feel way less stressed because you're not going to be worrying about everything all at once. I still struggle with this all the time. The smaller the company, the harder this is, but it is really important to think about this. Rule number 4, get something done every day, even if it seems insignificant. The whole point in having that work back schedule is knowing that you're working towards something. You have stuff you got to meet. In game design, we often call these milestones or deliverables. I mean, that's not just like a game design thing, but you get the idea. There's always some goal you have to reach, which is, oh, I want to show this to Xbox and I need to have something done. And it has to get done by this date. So that's our current goal. Or it might be like the weekly goal of we need to have a bunch of stuff in so we can all look at it together and be like, oh, cool, that mechanics is awesome. Or these, this new UI stuff is working out. Like, this is all great. It has to be something. It's not always going to be the most glamorous thing. Sometimes it's going to be fun. Sometimes it's going to be hard. Sometimes it's going to be easy. But every day, just get something done. Because over time, you'll realize you're checking off all that stuff and things are getting done. So some days you will have a bad day. You will not be like, you got no sleep. Things are going really bad. You will not be able to figure out a really difficult design problem. But you can do admin work. You can get back to those emails. You can do a bunch of other stuff. You can set up things so that someone else can get their work done. And you can do really boring things where you can just play some chill music and just like sketch or do whatever. All of that is valid. All of that is cool. The trick is like, just let yourself do it. Don't worry about it too much. Don't get too hung up on what you feel like you have to get done today if it's absolutely not going to work. Rule number 5, embrace laziness. Sometimes you are just not going to get anything done. Sometimes that's like the whole day. Sometimes that's just in 1 hour. Sometimes that's in 20 minutes. But if your body and mind and everything is telling you like, nothing's going to happen, there is nothing you can do. You're just going to waste time. You're going to burn yourself out, and you're going to basically spin your wheels and do a bunch of work that you're going to redo the next day anyway. So take a break. If everything is telling you to do that, take a break and talk to your teammates and say like, this is not working out today. And this is all sort of built into your schedule. You just think about this. You know this is going to happen. I had a friend. So when I worked at my design job, I had my friend who was also kind of like my boss. I was like a really efficient worker because I just wanted to leave at 5. He would always hang out later. But I would realize like, man, dude is spending like 35% of his day working. And I'm pretty sure at least that like 20 more percent is downloading techno. And like the rest of the percent is getting coffee and going for snack breaks. So he was like not really great about managing his time. I wanted to leave at 5, so I would just get stuff done a lot faster. But I would also plan to kind of like at least spend half an hour or like an hour a day and just like, I don't know, look at like Doom levels or something. I was always doing something silly, but I planned it into my day. So for me, what's really important is I need to walk. I need to exercise, like I run. So things like that are really helpful. I need to think about something else. And I like, these are actually my favorite things: napping, walking, running, reading a book, and just thinking about anything other than work. Especially if you're on a small team and you end up doing this stuff on like a really tight schedule, it's just going to like take over your mind. So those breaks are 100% necessary. Don't feel you have to be thinking about this stuff 24/7 because, you'll burn out quickly. And if you have hit a wall, there is nothing you're going to be able to do to get through that wall. That's why those breaks are super important. Recognize when you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I go take, like I said, walks a lot because I would just like staring at a screen will never provide an answer. Like 0% in human history has just staring at something giving you an answer. This stuff will generally kickstart your brain into giving you an answer. So if you hit this wall, recognize it, walk away. I know this sounds counterproductive and like tell you to like be lazy, but trust me, it helps. And my favorite rule number 6, be like water. I always love this quote from Bruce Lee because the whole idea is like you have to just go with the flow sometimes. Like sometimes things are just like rock and roll, got to get stuff done, and you're in the groove, and that's cool. And some days you're just like, oh man, this ain't happening anytime soon. And you have to be cool with both of those situations to be able to like get stuff done when you need to, and chill and take time off in those moments, because it's never going to be consistent. It's never going to be the same thing like day to day. There's always going to be surprises, but you have to be able to sort of go with the flow. That's it. I don't have a closing slide. That's sort of the final talk. That's 41 minutes. That's pretty good. So that's kind of the whole thing. So I don't know how the rest of the stuff works, but I guess you can let me know.
Yeah, that was amazing. Thank you so much, Ben. If you guys have questions, just feel free to put them into the chat and then we can ask him on live. But I have a question in the meantime, Ben. We have a lot of students that either don't have any gaming experience or have very little gaming experience that are going to start on Monday. And I think the question is kind of like, how do you start? Some people have a lot of ideas and they can't pick from them. Some people have like no ideas and they don't know where to kind of like get an idea from.
Sure. So what I usually do is I introduce a bunch of artificial constraints. I just say, I don't want to make the decision, so I want something else to make the decision for me. So if you've got a bunch of like ideas, or you sort of have a couple concepts you're not sure what to do, just give yourself something fake like, well, I want to get it done by the end of the month. And then quickly you'll go, well, I definitely can't get this done by the end of the month. And maybe this one I can, this one I can. And you go, okay, decision made. When you're working on games, because there are so many components, like you have to, design, music, all that kind of stuff, you have to remember to relieve all the decisions you can from your brain, because you will have to make a lot. So whatever lets you essentially make fewer decisions is good. So you can also say, like, what's the smallest idea I have? Or honestly, what's the one that sounds like it's going to let me make music that I like the most? Like, just pick something at random. You can literally put it in a hat and pick it. That is okay too. Don't feel like there's some magic way you have to, like some magic way to do it. Sometimes just force someone, or honestly ask someone. Like I'll just ask like Nancy to be like, I don't know, what should I do? And she'd be like, do this. Okay, like I just do it. I'm just happy to do something because I didn't have to make the decision. When we do projects with my students, I give them themes and a bunch of mechanical constraints for their games, so they don't have to think about that stuff. They can just think about like, okay, well, I have to meet these goals. Like I have to make a game about skies or whatever, and I can only use 2 buttons and do whatever, and that way you don't have to think purely from scratch. Does that sort of answer? I hope.
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest thing in going into any hackathon is like, how do you start? How do you put those like restraints on yourself? So definitely picking out a hat, talking to friends is a really good idea. And let's see, what would you say is like the biggest constraint that you've ever faced in creating a design that you also see other students face? And how would you
boy, good constraint or bad constraint? Time is always the biggest one and is always the worst one, because time essentially defines everything. Ability is obviously going to be a huge thing. Like if you're new, so Home, the game I mentioned before, the one that we just launched the Switch version of, that the entire design process of that was because I'm like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do this. I don't even know like what any of this stuff means. So what can I do within the constraints of what I know how to program, and let's just sort of be creative within that space, which is 100% fine. So ability and time are the biggest things. Sometimes it's scope though. Like if you are working by yourself, well, okay, well, how you need to, assuming you need to produce art assets or audio, or you need to find audio or whatever, like how much can you do yourself? How much are you going to need help with? And if you have to do it all, like, what does that mean? And to be honest, sometimes you get the coolest results from that, because if you're like, I can't draw, I can't create music or sound effects, but I can find stuff and do cool things with it, which is totally legit. And sometimes you will actually find better answers. Don't feel like you have to be like, oh my goodness, I need to become the world's greatest artist, programmer, designer. Like, of course not. No one is. Like, you basically fill the gaps where you can with whatever you can, and you just get it done.
Definitely. We actually have a really good question about like design documents. So how strict should you stay to that design document,
Oh, that is a very
especially
good
as your
question.
idea
The answer
changes or
is
evolves?
your design document will always look like an alien being by the time you're done. It's kind of like it's like driving. Sorry, Canadian. So it's like driving on the road in winter. As long as you know that the road's in front of you, you're good. How close to each side you are when it's really bad, you kind of can't think about it at that point. As an example, when I tell my students when they make their design documents, they will always get really worried about that. Like, oh, if we make a game at the end and it's very different from our design doc, is that going to be bad? And I say, no one makes the game that they put in their design document. If you sort of get 70% of the way there, you're doing great. Like, it means you had a clear idea and you sort of knew what you were up to. You will always stray. Those examples I showed before of like the Alone With You stuff, with like the loop, the gray boxes, and like all that stuff, most of that stuff is not in the game, or like not in the game in that regard. But you kind of have to have that conversation first before you can start to kind of evolve from there. So like embrace that evolution. The key thing though is making sure that like if things have changed, everyone knows it. So don't just like not tell anyone. You might have to update the document or whatnot, but as long as you all know what's going on, that's totally fine. But of course, like you will come up with a brilliant new idea or solution, like run with it. That's absolutely great.
Awesome. And we have another question. Do you have any suggestions for working on a passion project
Oh yeah.
with no time constraints?
Okay, so okay, yes, I have two things. First thing is create a fake time constraint. Whether that's like a fake deadline. So I tell my students who work on their own stuff, itch.io is a website. I'm not sure who here knows about that stuff, but it's basically a marketplace where anyone can post games. There's a lot of like really cool experimental stuff. There's a lot of like weird horror games, which I love. It's really cool. But I will often tell my students like, okay, pick a date, any date, Valentine's Day, like your mom's birthday, like whatever, and say, I need to get a game up because I want to upload it to itch.io by that time. And then say, okay, what can I do in the time that I have? Whether that's like 2 months, a month, 3 months, just pick it. When I do comics for myself or any project, I always give myself some kind of deadline if there is none. Like I'm working on a comic right now that I just published myself. I published it on Comixology, and like it doesn't matter when I put it. No one cares whether the comic exists or not. But I at least give myself some basic deadline, like I want 1 chapter a month or 6 weeks or whatever, and it at least gives me that mental urgency of like, hey, don't slack off today. Like I know you can get it done. Put in some time. But a major thing is start small. The one thing I didn't mention in the design or sort of my little presentation that I probably should have mentioned is making games is like completing a quest in an RPG. If you don't do the entire quest, like you talk to the person, you go get the item, you bring it back, you don't get the XP, that quest is not completed. And games are the same way. If you don't finish the game, you don't learn what you need to learn, and you will not be able to sort of grow as a game developer. Whether your game is a 1 minute long, like art game, super experimental with like no graphics and just sound, you need to quote unquote finish it for it to matter. A game that you're working on forever isn't going to teach you anything. So I call it completing the loop. Every time you complete the loop, you're like, sweet. And what's weird is you will always learn like 30% more by completing the loop than by working on something really cool forever and never completing it. Because what you'll do is you'll go from beginning to end and be like, okay, I want to start a new game now. Well, I remember last time I was setting up a project file in GameMaker or whatever, and I was like, I did this and this and this. Don't do that. That was dumb. Like, I know if you do this and this, it saves me a ton of time. Or I learned this last time, so we're just going to skip right ahead to, step 6. And everything gets way more fun and faster, and you come up with better ideas, and you can do more, and you can sort of like run further, all that stuff. But you have to complete the whole loop for that to work.
Definitely. We also have another really relevant question for the Gameathon, which is we have 1 week to complete this project, right, from start to end. What is a good scope for that?
Oh, okay. So two rules of thumb. Whenever I work, or especially when I tell my students to work on something, take your idea, cut off 75%, and then say, can I get this done in a week? 9 times out of 10, the answer would be like, maybe. Because we just naturally, it's basically like, it's like going to Thanksgiving dinner and just sitting down with a plate and you're like, what have I done? Scoping out a game is often the same way. So cut it by 75%. And if you're like, oh yeah, that's not enough, like that doesn't make that's not going to get me anything. Then you can start adding. So another way to think about it is in time. For something you're going to do in a week, actually, as an example, the students that make games in my class, they're working on a digital project for like 6 weeks. And I tell them, you're going to have a 2-minute game at the end if things go really well. For our games, like the game I mentioned, Worse Than Death, that's a 3-hour game. That was a 2-year process, 1.5-year process. So aim for like 2 minutes. Something that is satisfying and that lasts 2 minutes. And then look at your scope and then cut 75%. And then if you go like, well, definitely not going to get it done, then you've sort of aimed too high. But if you're like, oh, that's too easy, like I totally know what I'm doing, then you can start adding stuff from there. Does that make sense? Does that answer?
I hope so. So start small and then you can build it up afterwards.
Yeah. You're always gonna, like, every game you've ever played is 25% of the game they wanted to make. That's why we have sequels, because they're like, finally, we can put this thing in that we absolutely could not do last time.
That's a really good idea. Make a sequel. Can you give us a list of websites? Oh, wrong one. That they can post their game after the Gameathon.
Oh, so the best one is itch.io. There's also, where else can you post free stuff these days? I'm thinking about a bunch of stuff that's probably already closed. That is honestly the best one. And then you can link from there, because they also have downloading tools for PC and Mac. Like, it's like a legit store. It's basically like, imagine if Steam was free and open to everyone, and have just like a bunch of weird stuff in it. That's honestly the best one, itch.io. From there, because you can make a store page with it, it like gives you a way to, and you don't have to like charge anyone. You can just put it up and be like, it's free. Here's like a block of text and here's a download. Then you can link it. And it is like a real legit thing. You can put in like title graphics and background colors and all that stuff. And it's a lot more fun to play. So I would say that's the one you just need to worry about, is itch.io.
Mm-hmm. And we're actually going to ask people to submit their projects to Itch anyway for the Gameathon. So that's perfect. Yeah.
And there are like legit game developers who make like games that sell millions of copies, and they will put up demos and do jams and do other stuff on there. So like, it's a really cool website. I like it.
Yeah, actually, there's like a game jam schedule there where you can find other game jams to participate in if you.
That's cool.
Yeah. Have you ever felt like you make a project too soon? They're scared that they start on some ideas because they know little, but they're eager to start on them.
Every single one. You will always be, when you start your project, it'll be like you've pushed a ball down the hill and suddenly you're in front of the ball and you're like, oh God, what have I done? And you're just trying to run to the bottom of the hill before that ball flattens you. Every single project will feel that way. The whole point is to start. So you will never be ready. You will never know everything you need to know to make your game, but you will probably figure it out. So just know that those 3 things are always true, 100% of the time. The whole point is you need to start, and don't worry about that. Like, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to realize, like I said, with that project I'm working on with Nancy now, where you're like, oh, what have I done? Like, I wasted a week trying to do this thing, and it turns out there was another answer. You gotta be ready for that. There's no perfect way to make a game. There's no perfect schedule. There's no perfect process. Like, you got to be able to get your hands dirty and make mistakes and come back. Even for every one of our projects, like the newest one, Worse Than Death, there were so many things that were not figured out until literally a week before we submitted the game to like Nintendo and PlayStation and Xbox to get certified. But like, you have this part in your head that's like, don't worry, we'll figure it all out. So a good way to think about it is, making a game is also like jumping out of an airplane, trusting that you have everything in your backpack to make a parachute on the way down, but not 100% sure. However, you're going to have to figure it out one way or the other. So just kind of embrace that sort of chaos and you'll be okay.
Let's go for the jump.
Yeah, but you got to jump. You definitely got to.
Where can our students find you and learn more about you and your games?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So we're on Twitter at Benjamin Rivers. We're on Instagram at Benjamin Rivers Inc., INC, because someone already took my name. I stream on Twitch at Benjamin Rivers Inc. And our website is at benjaminrivers.com. It's like all branding I got going on here.
That is awesome. I think that's actually the end of our questions. So thank you so much, Ben, for joining us. If you guys have any questions, you can always feel free to reach out to him through LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, everything.
Yep.
And yeah, Ben, do you have any closing remarks? Anything you want to say?
Don't be afraid to make games. Like, just do it. Start with the smallest thing you can imagine, even if it's going to take you like one afternoon to do it. Finish that, and then you'll be like, haha. And then you'll take something that takes a morning and an afternoon. Finish that. Just don't be afraid. Keep making games. One of my favorite game developers, John Romero, who made Doom, Wolfenstein, all those games, he has over 150 games under his belt. Most of those, they're like 2-minute games. The whole point is to just keep making them. So don't be afraid and just keep going at it.
Definitely make that jump, and then you guys are going to be good to go. But yeah, I'm going to end the broadcast now, but thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone makes games.